You're listening to episode 106 of the SBP Podcast Mobile Filmmaking, and I'm your host, Susy Botello. I'm gonna talk about Windows, but I'm not talking about those Windows on PCs. No, I'm gonna talk about the windows of opportunity. There's two of them. There's a window of opportunity to submit your feature-length film into the International Mobile Film Festival, and that is before the regular deadline of October 19th. The other window of opportunity is for the short film competition. Get your films in before November 19th. That's the regular deadline for that. So make sure that you get those films in. Submit your films to the International Mobile Film Festival in San Diego. We're planning an in-person event. We're also planning an online event after the film festival so we can share the in-person event. Anyways, make sure you get your films in, internationalmobilefilmfestival.com. You're going to meet someone in this episode of the SBP podcast. His name is Darcy Yuille. He made a feature-length film. It's called One Punch. The film has a great cast of characters, and you know what? I'm not going to describe the film because this is going to be redundant. He's going to describe the film, but he's going to do more. He's going to go into lighting, cinematography, pre-production, post-production, and everything you need to know about making a feature film with your iPhone. But this is the cool thing. This is like a full, informative, substantial episode. And you're going to walk out of this, if you're even thinking about making a mobile film and still have doubts, listen to what Darcy has to say, because I think that he's going to inspire you. Let's go. Hey, I'm here with Darcy Yuille. Actually, I wish I was where he was, because in San Diego, it's pretty hot right now in the summer. At the end of the summer, we're in August. But over where Darcy is, tell me what the weather is like out there.
I'm looking out a window and it's very gloomy, and people are wearing lots of clothes and jackets because it's winter in Melbourne.
Oh my God, I love it. Hey, Darcy, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, I want to share with our listeners why you're on the show. You actually submitted a film to the International Mobile Film Festival here in San Diego. We haven't made our final selections for the feature films, but whether Darcy's film makes it or not, it's an exciting, awesome film. And so I asked Darcy to come on the show and share this really inspirational film from the end of first the story, the acting, and the other thing is, let me see. Oh my God, you guys, this film looks like something you're watching on Netflix. It's beautifully produced. Darcy, before I get started, I read something that you put at the bottom of your email when we were communicating.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to explain that because I think that's really important, and I'd love for you to share that before we even talk about your film.
Sure, yeah. So in Australia, you know, we were colonised by the English, much the same as the Americans, as you are. But one of the movements that's happened in the last maybe, we had a bit of a moment, almost when you had a moment over there with Barack Obama. We had a Prime Minister called Kevin Rudd who instituted a day called Sorry Day, which was to say sorry for all the things that we'd horrible things that we'd done as a nation to our Indigenous peoples. And one of the upshots of that, I think, now is that we're starting to use more local names for places. So, places that used to be called Ayers Rock are now called Uluru. They're given their Indigenous name. And when we write emails now, it's kind of, we tend to put on the end of it, so I respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and their elders past, present and future, who are traditional owners of the land on which I'm located. And that's really important because it just signifies to everybody that we realise and we respect where we're living, because the Indigenous Australians had such a great respect for the land and where they lived and for each other. And it's a beautiful thing, first of all, for me to be able to incorporate into my life, but I think it just implies respect as well, which has been missing for such a long time.
That's really interesting. So far away, halfway across, full circle almost across the world, where you are. The Native Americans here, some of the ones that I've met, they have this thing where, they select certain herbs, right, and use them for medicinal service purposes, right? But before they grab that herb from the earth, they actually ask for permission. And it's a sign of respect. And they ask, for permission to take that from the earth and use it. And I think, it's such an interesting, definitely something that more people, I believe personally, should pay attention to, because it's not a coincidence, that they're listening to something out there from one end of the world, as people here are listening to something. It's about, the opening of that part of people deep inside, and they're receiving the same messages.
Yeah, it's very heart-led, which I think is important.
Yes, definitely. And it's very, very awesome, I think, of you to, to do that, especially making a film, because it's a very, I know in New Zealand, they've had some issues with things like that as well. So
New Zealand is probably influenced us quite a lot in the way that because they're much more forward thinking, I think, in the way that they relate to their Indigenous peoples. So we're a bit behind, but I think we've learned a lot from them.
Yeah, most definitely. All right, guys, let's talk about what you're really anticipating here. Let's talk about your film.
Sure.
It's called One Punch.
Yep.
Why don't you explain a little bit about? Well, I mean, they're not watching the film yet, right? Someone down the line will watch the film and understand more about why you chose that title. But without giving away the film publicly, explain the synopsis of the film and why you called it One Punch.
Sure. Pretty often in Australia, and this is pre-pandemic, but also around the world, I think there's a history of young men going out for a night on the town, or not even particularly young men, and then probably drinking too much, and somehow these evenings sometimes end up in some form of tragic violence. So I've had it happen to myself, walking down the street with a friend when I was 21. He got hit in the back of the head for no apparent reason. Whole fight started. But these things happen quite a lot, and it sort of felt to me like it was still happening, 20 years later after it had happened to me. These things were still happening, and in fact people were starting to die. And so that started the genesis of making a story about a young man who might go through this experience. But one of the things I think interested me the most was where this reaction came from, where young men felt it was okay to be violent with one another. And I did a lot of research actually, and I noticed that in the US they called it a one punch incident. In Australia we called it a king hit initially, but we've now rebadged it as a coward punch. But it also happened in other parts of the world as well. So this is where I thought, okay, there's a story here. And so the story of One Punch follows a young man named Matt, who's an Italian-Australian boy, and he's just on the cusp of finishing high school, and he's about to go out into the world as an adult, and he's not doing very well at school, and he's getting a lot of pressure from his parents. And as a result of this, as well as the way that he's treated by his family and his peers, he's going to head down maybe a difficult path when he goes out for his 18th birthday. I hope I explained that properly. It's my first interview.
Yeah, I did. Well, okay. So this film, the characters in the story, the protagonists of the story. Let me talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So Matt is the protagonist of One Punch. I thought it was really interesting to look at a kid who had probably everything going for him from the outside. When you look at someone and you go, they've got a seemingly nice family, they've got good friends, they're not in poverty. This is the kind of middle class Australian kid who should be doing, fairly well, but you never know what's happening behind doors. And so part of that is that his family are involved in, a number of businesses, and he's struggling at this age where he's trying to become a man and understand what a man is. He's trying to meet girls, he's trying to go out with friends, he's trying to do all these things, but also he's trying to come to terms with who his family is and how they sit in the society that he's involved in. And it's a very difficult time. I remember, particularly for me, being 18, you're often quite stuck between this whole life of school that you've had for most of your life, and then all of a sudden you're booted out into the world and told, okay, now you've got to go and be successful. And so in that very small moment, that's where I wanted to situate the character and kind of put them under the pressure, I guess, of that kind of environment.
All right, Darcy. Now, everyone who's seen this, all few people that have watched this film,
I think you're like the second.
Yeah. It's unbelievable because for me, looking at it, watching it, first of all, aesthetically, it looks very well done. The production value is there also with all the locations that you used in the first few scenes, right? In the car, in the daylight. It just opens up like just any other Hollywood film that I've watched. The camera placements and the cinematography is incredible. I was talking to James Smith and Caroline Spence in one of our episodes, and I was talking to them about establishing shots. Especially in feature films, which I think they belong in all films, but I think they definitely belong in longer stories, right? And you do that very well. You have some great establishing shots, that you expect to see in films that are sometimes overlooked. And yeah, I think the cinematography is incredible. And it's not all cinematography that you can only do with the phone. There were some scenes in the bathroom and things like that I thought probably you benefited from a lot from using the iPhone.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
Those shots, right? Explain before I feel like I'm teasing everybody, but explain to let's talk a little bit about you and your history so they understand where you even came up to those skills that you have as a director and a filmmaker. Who is Darcy and where did he come from and what brought you into this whole world of filmmaking and then iPhone filmmaking?
Sure. Well, like anyone, I think there's a lot of luck involved. I was studying I was studying Italian and Spanish, of all things, at university. And I got a job working in a restaurant or in a cafe cleaning dishes. And it turned out that the people that owned that cafe ran a film company, quite a high-level commercial film company in Brisbane in Queensland. And they made a lot of international hair commercials and soap commercials and things like that. And because we've got beautiful locations in Queensland, we used to do a lot of international shoots. And so I got to be, I guess I started as a catering assistant on large commercials. And from there I I remember being on my first commercial, which was a big Sunsilk commercial with Laura Dern. And I'm sitting there looking at 30 people standing around in their shorts and T-shirts going, I think this is for me. I really want to do this because I'll never have to wear a tie or any of those kinds of things. So, and it's really interesting that from that first shoot, at the end of that first shoot, 2 other young guys on that shoot, we went and shot a short film, and it was meant to be a one-night short film, and I was going to be, camera assistant, and by the end of 5 nights, we were still shooting. I'd become one of the lead actors. I'd also was first ADing and lighting and all these things. So we just kind of, got really stuck into it. And the 3 of us have actually gone on to have quite, decent careers in different areas. So you kind of built this, this sense of family. I really attached to that. And also I got really attracted to the camera department because the company that I was working for, the director, he also shot his own commercials. So he was a DOP and a director. And so I used to go into the film company and I would go in and, sweep the floors, do whatever for free. I would go and clean equipment and make myself, useful around the place, and that got me more and more work. And then I started just loading films. So back in the days of loading films, so I started loading film on short films and, for free, obviously. I did, years of free work. I changed my degree to do a screen production degree, which was basically video, so working with high 8. And yeah, really, really dived in. And I was lucky enough to get some work on a studio feature, which was a film called Pitch Black, which was one of the first Vin Diesel films. And so I got a job on that as
I saw that. As
production
soon as
runner.
you said it, I was like, cool.
Yeah. It was great. It was a great experience. He's a lovely man, or was back then. I don't know what's happened since, but yeah. It was a really good experience to work on a large feature like that. And then the last 2 weeks of that feature, I got to work in the camera department as a video split operator, and that sort of helped me bump up the what we sometimes call the greasy pole here. So then, after that, I was able to I started loading and then focus pulling on TV series and stuff like that was made so I worked on this TV show called The Lost World. It's really schlocky and kitsch, but it was made for Canadian TV, and just doing what all people do, which is, working with friends, making music videos, shooting music videos. I actually wasn't shooting much in those days. I started directing, and I found this passion for directing because I started working with actors and discovered, wow, there's this whole process that they go through. And just being lucky enough to work with some young actors who really committed to their roles and did a lot of research and did a lot of homework, that kind of inspired me. And so I made a couple of films, won a couple of awards as a young filmmaker, and then I thought I'll go and do my master's. So I went to a school, I applied to a school called the AFTRS, which is in Sydney, which is a bit like the AIF, I guess, but the Australian version. And I was really lucky to get into that. But I was, it's funny in hindsight, I applied for the directing course and got in. And that's...
Well, I think you were doing something here that I want to point out, that it seems like from what I'm listening to, that you were working it, like you started working for free, right?
Yeah.
To network and meet people, and at the same time you were building your reputation and your integrity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Susy, I still work for free because I love working on films. I mean, I really love that process, and sometimes I love just being a camera assistant still. And then it's also how things get made. Like things, it's very hard to make productions if you don't have a budget. And I mean, I can talk to that a bit more about how we made One Punch, but definitely, you've got to, I sort of feel you've got to give favors to get favors. And so those kinds of experiences were really important too, because you learn so much. Like the difficulty, I think, with film schools is, I did my master's for 2 years. I made 4 films in 2 years. But as a camera assistant, I could have worked on 30 films, or 30 little productions in 2 years. So the benefit of learning is really different from being on decent sets. You really, really pick up a lot. But by the same token, it's very hard to pick up those heads of department kind of skills that are hard to learn from a book as well. You've really got to practice.
I had the benefit of finding the work and then deciding to change my major into film and video. And so while I was learning, I was actually doing it. And that helped develop, whatever it developed inside me.
Yeah.
Where most other students were studying, and then, they were always looking for ways to get their foot in the door, but they were busy studying it.
Yeah.
And things are handed to you. You go to the lab and there's the editing equipment, and you go to, rent out and check out the camera. You don't have, even though it's hard, you don't have the hardships that you do out on the field.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think there's still an interesting, because I teach as well, there's still an interesting balance, I think, between theoretical learning and practical learning in film education. I don't know if we've cracked it yet, but I actually think smartphone filmmaking has great potential for managing that. And, I'm happy to talk about that a little bit.
My God, go for it. Just start talking about that. You got me all excited here.
Well, because I started my doctorate at the start of this year, and what got me excited because of doing One Punch, and I really found that, I invested 3 years of my life and a certain amount of money to make this film, and there were times when I was so down about it. But also, when I looked back, I just, when I entered into the, I had this ethos when I entered into the making of the film, which was, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to get caught up on what things could be or what they should be. I'm just going to keep moving forward. And when I come to a decision, I'm just going to take that next step and move into it rather than stop. And so from that, I was able to make the film and learn so many amazing lessons, like that thing you were saying about establishing shots. The first scene of the film is my character waking up in bed, which I think is the cheesiest shot of any. It's a very traditional filmmaking technique.
Yep.
And I did not even realize I was doing it.
What was it? Back to the Future that started out the same way?
Yeah. It's weird that I didn't even pick up on it. Because to me, the reason I wanted to do it was I wanted to start the film with a perspective of my character and end it with a perspective of him, so that we're looking at him as an audience. And I wanted to be a little bit distant from him at the start, and I wanted to be right in there with him at the end. And from there, it kind of, that's where it came from. So I guess it, as long as it comes from a position of you're trying to do something, then it works. But it is an old technique,
but it works. That's why it's used.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, at least I didn't have an alarm clock. But yeah,
you know what? Yeah, I got to tell you something. It's pure irony. One of the first films that I ever worked on, actual narrative films, started out the same way. The alarm clock, goes out. This guy's hand is like, and he's waking up, and it's a teenager. So it's funny.
Hey, we've all made those, and there's a real truth about them. And I think actually everyone needs to make one of those films too, because it's a natural bookend to a story. It's the beginning of the day, and things start off this way. So yeah, I think I just think it's interesting that with being able to use a smartphone, we're able to shoot this film we shot for, would have been 13 days, 12, it was a 10-day schedule that, we had to do 3 days of pickups, but that was it. And, to shoot a feature in that amount of time is quite a big feat. And there's no way we could have done that with all these, because actually we have all these different locations and we have cars and all those kinds of things. And we're able to do it because of the smartphones. And I think also because, I was shooting it. But the one thing that really helped was having a camera operator, so someone who was actually operating the camera maybe 50, 60% of the time.
Well, you were an AD, so you probably had an excellent shot list too.
Yeah, I was quite organised, and I think you have to be. I think that organisation really helps you. So absolutely, the whole thing was planned out, but not pre-blocked. I think was the key. So I knew every location. I knew how I thought it should be, but then we just went back to that idea that at every location, let's not get there and stress about where the camera is. Let's get there and block it through, work out where everything is, work out where it's happening. And we did a lot of one-ers as well. So we did a lot of, single setup scenes, because that's the benefit of the smartphone as well, is that the production design that you're talking about, we're in the middle of the city of Melbourne, crowds going around. We're actually there on a Friday night when it's really busy, but no one notices because I'm just a dude with a smartphone, and the characters are just standing there. There's no, very minimal lighting, and that's.
You did. I got to talk about that. So you did these creative shots in between, establishing the scene, the night scene, the club scene, the street scene. And I really, really, I just think all of that was adding texture to the story and the setting, and it helps people step away and step really fully inside of not just the characters, but as where they were and what they were experiencing.
Yeah, and those were all shot pretty much during the shoot, because we'd be walking around the city and we'd see, there's a guy lifting up a girl and carrying her across the street because they're both drunken idiots. And and that's happening, and when we filmed it, luckily from behind, so we don't know who they are, but those kind of things were just actually happening and unfolding in front of us. So we're able to capture it in the moment and use it. And I think some of that stuff's really amazing. Like, there are homeless people sleeping in the street. It's what's actually there as all these other people are going around and drinking and, having a supposedly good time.
It's a lot like here downtown in San Diego at night, where you walk around in the heat of that night. Now, probably there 2:00 is like over here at 11:00 because they close everything up at by 2. Or over there they probably have they don't close them so early. But the guy sleeping on the sidewalk, things like that are very, very common to see here as well.
And I did want to, that's in there to make deliberate comment on maybe the values that we have as a society. So, yeah.
Yeah. So then, okay, now here's the other thing. Once, I just want to share this because I don't get to share this part. Because there's always lighting and things like that you want to talk about. But when you go inside the nightclub and you have all these colorful lights that are naturally there, it seemed like the phone was handling it, the camera, right, was handling those really well.
Yeah, so I had a lighting package of 2, like I invested in a hire of 2 lights, and because they were battery powered lights, they were these little lights called micro RGB lights. So they were a little, this great little, they're solid. Like you could probably hit someone over the head and I'm trying to be polite without being rude, but you could kill someone with them if you hit them, right? They're these solid little things, but they're no bigger than probably a cake box, and they're absolutely waterproof. Like you can dunk them in water, and they run off these great batteries. And these lights can do all sorts of different effects. They can do flickers, they can do lightning, TV, all that stuff. But they also do every single color possible. And So you can just tune it in at the back. And so while we did have some lighting in the nightclub, what we were actually doing was providing most of that light from these two little lights. And you can't see it, but quite often our gaffer is actually in the background of shots dancing with people and just holding a light above his head, and it's just out of frame. So you've got these kind of, because he's a friend of mine, an old friend of mine, and he was just in it. He was there to enjoy it. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Maybe you can share if you happen to have links.
Yep.
We can share it with our listeners as well.
Sure.
Oh,
yeah.
that's pretty. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Share a little more now. Going back to the beginning of the set, the father and this other character, the love interest's father.
Yeah.
The bullying that plays out through this movie between the kids and that's a big part of the story. How did you block those? Because there's some punching going around and just that.
Yeah, look, I was really lucky to have worked on, I think this show that I worked on back in the late 90s, The Lost World, we did a fight scene every second day. And even though I was a camera assistant, I was able to see how the stunties blocked it and how they shot it. And because the camera's, it's one eye, it's not 3D, you can work with the parallax error to really make anything work if you put the camera in the right place and you cut at the right time. So, we just very carefully went through it. And then, when he throws his punch, he's quite a way away from the other. There's no chance that he's hitting the actor, but you block it so that the action of the punch is happening, but also the actor being hit is also reacting at the same time, so that you get a believable moment. And in fact, we did the same with other sequences in the film as well, where it's a bit like shooting a music video. When a music video has, you might have 300 shots for a 3-minute music video. Sometimes for some of the scenes, like for example, there is a large fight scene in the film. And I knew when we scheduled the film that I just wanted one night to shoot that. I didn't want to have to go to any other locations. I didn't want to have to do anything else. We're just going to focus on this one scene for the whole night. And so in the schedule, you can work that around, and it meant that we were able to get, I think we probably got 80 setups for that scene. And it gives you the ability to really make it work in the edit. So, yeah, whereas a lot of the other scenes were about just getting this one shot to tell everything. With a lot of the violence, I wanted it to be really visceral. I wanted people to feel the impact, because I think the sense that the lead character matters in this world that is ruled by, casual aggression. His father hits him, other people get hit. It's very normal for some people in this story. And, therefore I think that kind of leads to, why these violent events happen. And that's been my experience anyway as a young man, is that, we react in those ways because we see it or we experience it. So I really wanted the audience to kind of be able to feel it. And
there was such a connection between the characters also, within the family characters and the people that were involved. And I think you were concentrating because of your experience, which is why I'm talking about all of this. Sharing it with our listeners, because you have this skill set that you had already, so you kind of knew what to look out for. Like you were just talking about right now, spending a night on that fight scene, and how important it is to make that believable. But you can do that all there and screw that up to the point to where when you get in post-production, your editor is like, I can't make it work right. And you end up with something, kind of flimsy, which even some of the best films I've watched, I'm like, really? Like, what made that decision, you picture the editor calling in the director and saying, "Hey, guy, look, or girl, whatever, but this is the best I can do, with what you gave me."
Yeah. Look, I think I guess you do it often enough that it gets drummed into you. Certain, like again, I go back to having worked on, what we called fast TV, where we'd shoot about 7 minutes a day. As a like by the end of my period as a camera assistant, my DOP was letting me, he's saying, go over there and set that shot up. And so I started to get the opportunity to operate every now and then. And you just, when you're on a big set, there is a lot of standing around. So you're talking to people and you take those ideas, I guess, with you, because it's, have you heard that old term? It's not the time it takes to take the takes, it's the time between the takes that takes the time.
Yes.
And like that's, there's so much time preparing for something. And if you know that, and if you've been able to experience that, then I think you can really focus on how to get from shot A to shot B to shot C to shot D. And it may seem counterintuitive sometimes to go, hey, let's just stop and let's just look at the whole thing and let's work it out. And then we'll light it from this place and then we'll just shoot the whole thing. Because we didn't model our lighting much. I mean, as much as possible, I just went, okay, I'm going to put the biggest light that I can and that's going to be our key. And then maybe we'll have a little bit of fill, but maybe not. And we're just going to shoot it from every position that we can. And because you've got an iPhone, you can
right.
Jump around and just really quickly reposition. And just using all of those tricks that you learn from large productions, like, moving the actor around so the light's a little bit better rather than moving the light. Maybe the background's not the correct background, but no one's really going to pick up on it. Those kinds of things are really useful. But
there's cheating. There's a lot of cheating going on, but you have to play a balance between cheating and then figuring out sometimes it's worth taking the time to set up certain things as well. And that really only comes from experience.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm trying to, my goal here is to inspire people to make movies with their phones. And I'm really pushing people who are making many short films to make feature films.
Yeah.
And I think, and there's some people that I talk to, not just in the podcast, off the podcast. And I tell them, look, I've watched enough of your short films. Some of them have participated in the film festival enough times. And I say to them, you're ready for a feature film. Just, trust me. I mean, you trust me with your films already.
Yeah.
You know me well. Trust me when I'm telling you, you're ready to start making a feature film. I can tell by, how you've progressed with your short films, and I'm not saying, oh, you're wise to take my advice, but it's part of what I'm trying to do here. And you can only get that by, through experience. I mean, I think, the play on words, you can only become an expert or as close to an expert with the experience. Those two start with the same word, right?
Yeah. I think I'd been in the industry for about 20 years before, and I'd always wanted to make a feature film, and I keep asking myself now, why didn't I do it earlier? And in fact, some of my mentors had said to me, this is where you should be. You shouldn't be, because I did, commercials and all these other things. But when I finally made the decision, it was in halfway through 2018, I actually went, okay, I'm going to make a film. And I came back and I spoke to my wife and I said, is this okay? Can I, spend this time over the next couple of years to make this film? And I think I'm going to shoot it on smartphones. And I think I'm really inspired by, obviously, Tangerine and, Unsane and all of that kind of stuff. And then I added on top of it, I think I don't know what the story is yet, but I'm going to do this crazy process where I work with actors in character-based improvisation, and we're going to make it as we go. And luckily she said, yeah, go for it. And
these are experienced actors.
Actually, the kids are all. This is all mainly their first projects, but definitely the dad. Yeah, Mirko, who plays the father, is a phenomenal man and a phenomenal actor. And because of the process that we went through, where they were all basically they all created their own characters with me as a conversation. You know, are you familiar with the process at all, Susy? The character-based improvisation.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah,
I took drama classes in every high school I attended, and it was my forte because I hated memorizing lines.
Yeah. So they the way it started was they all brought me 20 or 30 different people that they knew in real life, and then we would talk through those people, and I would go, that's the person. I want you to go and follow that person around, and I want you to base a character on them. And then we'd change the name, and then we'd build a history, and then I'd start throwing them into improvisations and really basic stuff like go and get a coffee with your dad, or, you know, your one of my favourite ones was these two schoolboys, and one was selling fake essays or selling essays to another boy who was buying them, you know, who needed an essay because he wasn't very academic, and they were doing this deal in a public place, but they were both completely useless at doing any kind of, you know, dealings. And I told one of them, you know, don't take less than $250 for this essay, and I told the other kid, you only need to give them $150. And so when they came together, they had this natural, you know, conflict, yeah. And out of that sprung this, you know, these reactions that they had, and they had to negotiate how to go forward. And it was really funny because the kid who did the essay just went, well, here's the first half, but I'm not giving you the second half, and then took the money. And, you know, it created a response to the situation that they were going to be in the story. So that's why I think the performances and the relationships work well, is because they actually spent a long time in their shoes. Like they did a whole, you know, half-day improvisation at one stage where they all came around for dinner at the family house. And Mirko, who plays the dad, is actually this phenomenal chef. He was a chef before an actor. And so he's made...
Oh, I know. I was looking at that going, oh, my God. Obviously, this is not something you just learn on set for one film.
No, when he's making the pasta at the end and stuff, that's all... And that all comes from that experience of, like, once he started doing it in the improvisation, everyone gathered around and they were really interested, and it was fascinating. And then he started teaching people, and it's like, oh, this is a scene. So that scene at the end is, you know, I regret the way I shot it, but at the end it had an element to it that really worked, and it, you know, it signifies the reconnection of the father and the son through this act. You know, there's no dialogue. There was no dialogue written for that scene. They just did it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. You know, we're just to satisfy this. Share with us what was the biggest difference in shooting with traditional cameras for you in this film. What let me see how I can phrase this. Some of the scenes that we've just discussed, right? You were shooting them with a smartphone.
Yeah.
If you had shot them with a traditional camera, what would that have cost you as far as the filmmaking process?
In economic terms?
Well, without in the conventional, like, you know, well, we would have, like, for example, the nightclub scene, right? That we were just talking about. If you hadn't shot that with a smartphone, if you would have shot it with a traditional camera, and we're talking tripods and, you know, big lights and everything, how would that have come together? In the end, would it have come together differently? Would we have seen a difference in the way that film was shot?
Absolutely, I think, because to a certain extent, but I think the ability to use a lens is somewhat restrictive with smartphone filmmaking, but it's also quite freeing when you've got, you know, this is the only lens you can use. Like, we used a Moondog anamorphic adapter.
The Moondog Labs?
Yeah. And then I used a moment close-up lens because I was using a camera that I only used the main lens on an iPhone 8 for most of it, so 8 Plus. And so if I wanted a close-up, I actually had to, because it's the film's shot to be anamorphic, so the close-ups are actually cropped, but using a tighter lens. And in fact, those are some of those shots look amazing. And so I think the restriction of not having a close-up lens is quite difficult for me. But also what I discovered from previous films that I'd made, short films, was that I get too enamored with the close-up and I bring it in way too early. And in fact, sitting back is, I think, really important. But yeah, look, the nightclub scenes, we shot that in one night. There's about 5 scenes in there, and there's no way I could have done that with, and that's like a 10-hour night. That's not a 16-hour night. We didn't go overtime or anything. So there's no way that we could have done that. I think, we would have needed camera assistants and focus pullers and gaffers and lighting and all those kinds of things. And I don't know that the story would be any better. I don't think it would be. So I really was, I knew at the time I was enjoying the way, like, I'd have to take a camera off a tripod and put it on a Steadicam or a Ronin or something like that, and then you'd have to balance it, and then something would change and you'd have to rebalance it. So that whole process of, what I call big filmmaking really gets in the way, I think, of just telling the story. And like you said, I did an assembly edit about 2 weeks after we finished the shoot, and I showed it to a friend, and they said, "Oh, what did you shoot it on? Is it, And I'm like, "It's a smartphone." And they're like, "Nah." And in fact, the funny thing is, Susy, that I've had people go, "Look, it just, like, it's clear that it's not an Alexa or it's not a Panavision," but some people look at the film and go, they don't realize it's a smartphone film at all. And I think that kind of counts against it a little bit, because it's been I haven't been able to get it into any festivals apart from smartphone festivals, because I think the format, I'm struggling and fighting against films with larger budgets and, more expensive equipment. But at the end of the day, I'm so grateful that I shot it on a smartphone, because the immediacy, being able to be there, and just this sense of, you can put that camera anywhere, no one's going to see it, no one notices, you can get this amazing stuff. Some of the stuff was shot, actually, there were some pickup shot during lockdowns here in Melbourne. There's some time lapse of driving through the streets. I literally just put the camera in the front seat of the car and went for a drive one night. And, it's very hard to do that kind of stuff when you've got to go and hire a camera, or you've got to, so having this smartphone there that you can just grab a sunset or grab a wide shot or whatever it is very freeing. And again, it's the story that matters.
I'll never forget this one. It was a horror film. It was shot inside this little cabin. It was a 1 weekend short film. And the camera guy, he wanted to use a film camera. And the whole place, it was shot day for night. And it was awfully dark. That never went anywhere, that film. It just didn't. I remember seeing a DVD and going, I'm having to turn off all the lights where I'm watching it, and I still can't see anything. Wow. It was very bad, and I'll never forget. So they were setting up a dolly shot inside this little cabin. It had this big film camera, and the DP drops the lens.
Oh God.
And broke it. And this wasn't, you were just talking about Moondog Labs, who, by the way, we just found out they are sponsoring our film festival this year. Oh,
that's amazing. Congrats.
Yeah. So a little shout out. So he drops this, and of course it cracks or whatever happened to it. And I took it upon myself to go get it fixed, get a different, a new glass put in. It took the rest of the day. I mean, I got back and it was almost midnight. It was just such a horrible experience. Now, I just imagine that happening, right? With a smartphone. Big deal.
big deal. Yeah, just next. You know, I had two. I remember going to Apple and buying an iPhone 8 Plus to shoot it on because I didn't want to be taking calls at the same time as I'm trying to shoot something. And telling the person there, you know, I'm a filmmaker and I'm going to make a film with this phone, and they were like, oh yeah, whatever, you know. And it's quite funny, but the reality is, yeah, you could just go and buy this thing, and you know, I still got that phone and I still use it to shoot quite a lot because the Moondog lens only fits that phone, but it's got a particular beauty about it. And those lenses are, you know, they're really, really amazing. They really do get a good look.
Yeah, they do. That's how Tangerine was made with that. And also the other thing, I should have mentioned this too. The other thing is the fact that you're able to watch the footage right after and say, oh, you know, that works, instead of waiting till you're developing film to find out that all the shots that you shot indoors were too dark.
Well, I shot a lot of tests, and actually while you were talking about that in terms of darkness with shooting on film, I did a lot of testing, and what I discovered was what was more important than the right exposure of what you wanted to see was that you really had to have your contrast ratio right when you're shooting with these phones. So yes, you need to have your character lit properly, but you need to really make sure that you're preserving your highlights, you know, so that the sky's not going too bright. And even your shadow areas, you need to make sure that they're not too lit. So a lot of the lighting that we really did was going, okay, this is the location we're in. This is what it looks like at this time of day. We're going to come back here and shoot, but we're going to need to add light from here. You know, and I know it sounds simple, but I think one of the things that often gets missed with smartphones is, you know, they don't handle contrast as well as larger sensors. So if you can take care of that and still get a good exposure, it means you can do a lot more with the grade because I graded the film pretty heavily. Shot it in a log mode with Filmic Pro. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, but thanks for bringing that up. I was going to ask you if you were using an app because that's the norm. The anamorphic lenses and Filmic Pro.
Yeah.
For feature films, you know, that want to have that cinematic look.
And 24p as well, I think, you know, making sure that you're shooting at 24 frames per second as opposed to 25 does give it that little bit, you know, more of a softer edge.
The edge. What about the audio?
So audio. So when I had this kind of ethos, like I said, going into the film I was going to try and spend as little as possible, but there were 3 areas where I paid for crew. So I had a makeup artist and I had a gaffer and I had a sound recordist. So I had a person who was just recording sound the whole time on their external device. So they were recording onto a proper sound piece of equipment with radio mics and all of that. So we were slating all the shots and then syncing in post. And that's been a huge difference because I think probably 80% of the film is the actual dialogue. Like 80% of the dialogue is actually from the day. And there's probably only about, 15, 20% of ADR. And then obviously there's a lot of Foley and stuff like that. But yeah.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, because imagine going through all that and having, the sound comes out like the microphone on the iPhone or something.
Yes,
it's like, are you kidding me? Well, it's incredible. I'm very impressed with your film. I hope it gets selected so that we're hoping to have an in-person film festival here in San Diego, and you'll be able to come and meet everyone and do a presentation.
That'd be amazing.
Maybe if some of your actors want to come out and check out the night scenes in San Diego as well. Darcy, if you had some advice, something that, not the typical, just get out there and do it type thing, but, some solid advice, especially now that, I realize you're also an instructor. What would you say to our listeners regarding making feature films with smartphones?
I think the big thing that that came through for me in this situation was making something that was true to you. So the one thing I didn't mention was that, you know, the film actually came from this idea because I was playing sport one day and there was a fight on the sporting field, and this was a couple of years ago, just bizarre. And I went, what if someone had been hit? You know, they could have been killed, and that's where the idea came from. And I think taking things from your life, there seems to be a backlash against that these days, whereas back in, you know, in the 60s, you know, the French were like, let's talk about our own expression. You know, the American New Wave, they're talking about things that were happening to themselves. I think as filmmakers, we should really be looking at our own experiences. It's not introspective and it's not navel-gazing. I think it's like we've all got something to say and we all have these unique experiences. And in fact, the only thing that's going to make you stand out is if you tell a story about your existence as opposed to trying to tell the next Tarantino film or the next, you know, you're not going to be able to do, you know, the Edgar Wright kind of thing maybe yet because you just don't have the funds, but you can talk about things that matter to you. And I think that's really important is that authenticity, because at the end of the day, you know, with One Punch, you know, I watch the film and I see the faults in it, but I'm so happy that I expressed myself and that I said this thing I wanted to say. And even if people say, you know, I don't like the ending or why'd you do this? To me, it doesn't matter because that, you know, that thing worked. Whereas I've made films for other reasons or for other things, or I haven't listened to myself, and they're the films I've been most disappointed with. So I think...
I think you walk out with, you know, the purpose, you know, you feel like there's a purpose for this story that you're sharing.
Yeah.
And if it's personal to you, right? It's kind of like when people say, you know, I was attacked, I was raped, I was this, I was an alcoholic, whatever it is. People listen and they connect with you. And I think when people walk out of a theater, right, after watching a great film, what they end up with is that thing that tosses around for days.
That's the goal,
and months,
I think. Yeah.
right? In their head.
Yeah. That's the goal, is that you know, for me anyway, I mean, I think for people to leave the cinema, and I think of my favourite filmmaking experience, like film watching experiences, and I'm still thinking about that film for days. You know, films like, I don't know if you saw Portrait of a Lady on Fire. It's this amazing French film, you know, and it's such a quiet film, but you walk out of it and you're like, oh my God, you know, there's so much to think about. So yeah, I mean, even Blue Moon, you know, the iPhone film that Steph Harris made, is,
well, you know, I know all about that film.
Yeah, I mean, I love that film, and it was very inspiring for me. Like that, I'd already shot One Punch when that film came out, but I was like, wow, this is cool. Someone else is, you know, really going for it. And the story in Blue Moon is about two boys growing up and then having a different relationship. You know, to me anyway, that was what resonated in that story, and I didn't see it coming. And when it hit, it was, you know, it was very meaningful for me, and I'm sure Steph would feel like there's things that he would have rather done differently. But to me, I think it's a great it's a classic little film. You know, it's a really special film. So,
well, I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask our listeners if they haven't already. Listen to episode 54, I believe, is the one with Steph Harris.
Cool.
And then go to 55. With Jed Brophy, and then just continue to work your way up because I've had just about everybody, including Judd Resnick, the editor on the podcast. Yeah, that's it's a very special film for me as well, because it was one of those inspiring films. I think that their openness to discuss it, you know what I'm saying, was really crucial to inspiring a lot of people, almost in the same way that Tangerine did, you know, for you initially. But it's the story. It's the connection between the characters and the story, and the way that, of course, you know, I'm not going to compare Jed Brophy and Mark Hadlow to the actors in your film, you know, but
different
I am
genre,
going to say that connection has to be there.
Yeah. I think when you know, what Steph does well in that film is that and Tangerine does well as that it doesn't tell you, you may think it's about one thing, but through the course of watching it becomes about something else. And I think that ability, and that's where the difference comes in, is yes, you're telling your own story. Yes, this story's been told before, but it's what's unique about you as a filmmaker that makes the story unique. And it's, if you can find that unique way of telling it, which I think Steph really did. So, you know, yeah, that's my advice.
And what I really liked about yours too is that it does have a message to it. It's not a message that has a pretty ending.
No.
You know, but it does do that one thing, which is what we're really talking about, which is it makes you stop and think.
Yeah.
And keep thinking and trying to solve a problem, which in real life, right, doesn't have a clear solution.
Not yet, no.
But it opens up the dialogue and the thought process for that. And that's something that we one of the reasons why I think filmmaking is so powerful as far as, you know, sharing stories, because it does something that just getting up somewhere and talking or writing doesn't do. And it can really grab at people from where it counts, from the heart.
It's interesting. See, you asked me for advice. I guess the only other thing I'd say is do your research, because when I went to make this film, I spoke to a lot of people. Like I spoke to the police, I spoke to people who worked in trauma, who had dealt with the aftermath of the one-punch attacks, because the actual issue is not the person being hit in the head. It's not the punch to the face. It's when the person falls and hits the ground. That's the issue. And because they often get knocked out and then they hit the ground. But I spoke to this amazing woman whose son had been a victim of one of these incidents, and she gave me her time. And actually a line in the film comes from her where she says, you know, if it had been my boy that had gone out and hit someone that night, I would still be standing behind him. You know, it's not these boys that are doing it. It's how they're, you know, it's how they get to that stage where they think this is appropriate. And that was an amazing, you know, thing. And you only get that from talking to people and actually trying to go as deep as you can.
So do your full research, which is something usually people do when they're, you know, creating, you know, making documentaries. Yeah, but you should also do it for your film.
Yeah. Well, I mean, actors do it a lot. I mean, I think as filmmakers, you've got to know as much about the world as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. A film that I worked on, the girl was playing somebody blind, and she spent a week with a blind person.
Yeah.
You know, so wow, this has been a really great conversation. Is there anything that I have? No. First of all, how can people, for someone who's driving and listening to this, what's one quick way to find you on social media? Like, are you mostly on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram? Where are you?
That's I'm a little bit social media. But if you want to, you can find me on Instagram. But my handle is Danger Darce. So DangerDarce. Or you can. My company is called Rooftop Film Co. So you can find me through there. But mainly, I mainly just post random pictures on Instagram, things I find beautiful in a day, and then you know, family, kids, dogs, those kinds of things. Yeah.
Oh, we all love our dogs.
Yes.
And also, how open are you if someone wants to, you know, is making a feature film, as long as you have a few minutes?
Oh,
right?
Yeah, get in touch. That's no problem. You know, like I said, I spoke to Steph. I got in touch with Steph, and he gave me some advice at one stage, which he didn't have to do, but he was so generous. So I think that's how it works. You know, you pass it on.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, say goodbye to our listeners, unless you've got something else you think we missed.
All good. I'll catch you later, everyone. Thank you for listening, and I can't wait to listen to more of these, Susy. They're really inspiring. Thank you.